It started with a sound no parent forgets, the ring of a phone at a time it should never ring. I was just sitting there in the living room, TV humming low, the kind of silence you only get in a house that's been grieving too long. And then my cell lit up, private number. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut twisted the moment it vibrated. You know that feeling, like your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. So I picked up, said hello, and everything in my world changed. Because on the other end of that dead signal was a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. My daughter's. My daughter, who was supposed to be gone. My daughter, who we buried. If you're here right now, watching this, I want you to listen closely, because what I'm about to share isn't just some internet creepypasta. It's not some made-up ghost story or thriller twist. It's what really happened to me. And by the time we're done, you're going to get the answer you came for. How can a girl who disappeared, whose remains were confirmed, suddenly call her father from a number that doesn't even exist in any database? That's the hook, right? That's what's been keeping me awake at night, too. And I promise, I'm going to take you straight to the truth, even if it leaves you looking over your shoulder when the phone rings next time. Now, I know your time is valuable. You could be watching 100 other videos right now. But you're here. That means something about this story caught your breath. Maybe it's because you're a parent. Maybe because you've lost someone. Or maybe, deep down, you've always felt like some things just don't add up in this world. Trust that feeling. And stay with me. Because by the end of this video, not only will you understand what really happened, you'll start questioning what's real around you too. Let me take you back. Her name was Lila. Just turned 17 when she vanished. Smart kid. Funny too. She had this way of looking at the world, like everything was art, people, pain, even silence. She could draw anything, capture a moment with just a pencil and paper. I still have the last one she sketched. It's a picture of our front porch, but in the window reflection, there's someone standing behind her. Someone we never recognized. That drawing haunted me for months. Still does. It was a Friday when she disappeared. She told me she was going over to her friend Bree's house for a movie night. We even joked about it. Don't watch anything too scary. Your old man won't sleep. That was the last time I saw her face in person. That night, she never made it to Bree's. Her phone went dead around 9:46 p.m. GPS last pinged a mile from our house, near that wooded patch by Miller's Creek. Cops did what they could. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers. For weeks, we searched. We screamed her name into every inch of those woods. Then they found the sweater. Then the shoe. And then what the coroner said was enough to confirm her identity. The funeral was small. Closed casket. I couldn't look. Her mom, my ex-wife, sat in the front row gripping a photo of Lila, so hard her knuckles went white. She kept whispering, asterisk, that's not her. That's not her. Asterisk, we thought it was denial, grief. But now I'm not so sure. Because that voice on the phone, that wasn't a memory. That wasn't some prank. It was her. I know my daughter's voice. It had the same softness, the same break in the R sound when she says sorry. The same nervous breath before she speaks. She said, asterisk, Dad, I don't have long. I don't think they know I got through. Asterisk and then, click, silence. I stare at my phone like it had just spoken in tongues. I checked the call log. No number. Just unknown. I tried call it back. Nothing. I even called the phone company, asked for a trace. They said no call had been recorded at that time. Maybe it was a spoof, the text said. Maybe someone's playing a cruel joke. But how do you fake a voice like that? How do you fake the little things only I would know? Like the way she used to hum before she spoke, or the way she whispered when she was scared. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I even say? That my dead daughter called me? But that night I didn't sleep. I sat by the phone like some broken man, waiting for a ghost to ring again. And then I started digging. Not just into the phone call, but into everything. Her case, the evidence, the autopsy report. I filed for every scrap of info they had, and what I found, it didn't make sense. There were inconsistencies, mislabeling, a blood test result that couldn't be confirmed due to sample degradation. a dental record that matched, but only partially. That alone should have raised flags, but they ruled it conclusive. And here's the thing no one wants to admit about small-town police investigations. Sometimes they want closure more than truth, but this goes deeper than that, because I'm not the only one. I started finding other parents through forums, missing persons blogs, even TikTok rabbit holes. They'd lost their kids too. Some got strange messages. Others, whispers on baby monitors. Some even saw them in crowds and reflections. I know how crazy this sounds. I wouldn't believe it either unless it was me. Unless I heard my own daughter's voice cutting to the static like a knife in my chest. And then the second call came. 3 days later, same time. Midnight. My phone rang again. This time she was crying. Asterisk, they said I can't talk to you again. I don't know where I am. Dad, please don't forget me. Asterisk, her voice started warping, like it was underwater. Then a sound, like a chorus of whispers rising behind her. And then nothing, just dead air again. But this time, something was left behind. A voicemail, 5 seconds long. White noise. But when I played it backward, it wasn't noise. It was a message. Asterisk, help her before the third call. Asterisk, since then, I've gone down every rabbit hole you can imagine. Dark web boards, psychic forums, missing persons networks. I even contacted a guy who works in telecom data spoofing. He told me something I'll never forget. Asterisk, there are phone numbers that technically don't exist, but that doesn't mean they don't transmit. Asterisk, he showed me examples. Government blacklists, frequencies used in classified programs, even old theories about numbers tied to psychological triggers, numbers that only certain people can receive. It sounds like conspiracy until you're the one getting the call. I started seeing symbols too, on the envelope that arrived at my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a drawing, Lila's. Her signature was there, her name in the corner, but the paper was aged, faded, as if it had been years. There was no postage, no postmark, just left there, like it had been dropped out of nowhere, or worse, out of somewhere else. Now, I'm not saying she's alive, and I'm not saying she's dead. What I am saying is that someone or something is trying to reach out, and if you're watching this, it means you're part of the connection now. You're a witness, which is why I need you to see this through. Don't click away. Don't let this be another story that gets buried under algorithm noise and forgotten in 4K resolution. If enough people hear this, maybe, just maybe, she'll know she's not alone. We've been told that death is the end. That missing means gone. That technology can't lie. But I've seen things now that make me believe there's a fracture somewhere in the veil between this world and whatever comes next. Maybe she's trapped in that space. Maybe the number she called from wasn't part of this network at all. Maybe it's one only the lost can dial from. And here's the twist. Something else is coming. Something tied to the third call. That's what the voicemail said. I can feel it in my bones, in that primal part of us that knows when a storm is coming before the clouds even move. It's not just about Lila anymore. It's about what happened to her, and what it's trying to warn us about. I hadn't always been the kind of man to chase ghosts. Before everything fell apart, I was a mechanical engineer, built things for a living, believed in logic, numbers, patterns, solid things that fit together. My world was predictable, measured, even if a little boring. After Lila vanished, that part of me tried to hold on. I kept going to work, pretended to be normal, went through the motions of bills and laundry and coffee. But grief has a way of turning the ordinary into something hollow. Every place I looked held her shadow, her toothbrush, her hoodie on the back of the chair, her playlist still popping up on the smart speaker. I told myself I was coping, but the truth is I was unraveling, and no one really saw it. People just assume that if a year goes by, you've made peace. You haven't. You just get quieter about your pain. My ex-wife, Dana, had moved across the country 6 months after the funeral. Said the town held too many memories, too much weight. I couldn't argue with her. We'd already been separated before Lila's disappearance, and after, we were barely speaking. It's strange. Losing a child doesn't bring you closer. It pushes every crack in your relationship wide open. Dana's way of grieving was silence, therapy, and finally, distance. Mine was clinging to anything that felt remotely like a thread back to my daughter. I'd go into her room late at night, sit on the bed, and talk to her like she was still there. I know how that sounds. But when the house is that quiet, the mind starts pulling you into places reason can't follow. After that first call, I became obsessed. Every night, I scanned the number logs, updated software on my phone, even bought a separate burner in case. She tried again, and the call got blocked somehow. I didn't tell Dana, not yet, not until I had proof. I started retracing the events of that week a year ago, pulling out every journal, every police report, every time-stamped social media post that could help me make sense of what was happening. I even reached out to Bree, her best friend, who'd moved away after graduation. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. When she picked up, there was this long pause before she said anything. Then she whispered, "Have you gotten a call too?" That changed everything. Bree told me about something that happened the week after Lila vanished. She said she got a voicemail, no caller ID, same as me. The voice said just one sentence: "Don't look for me. They're watching." Bree never told anyone. She thought maybe it was some prank or that her mind was cracking under stress. But when she heard my voice on the line now, telling her what I'd experienced, I could feel the dread crawl through her breath. She admitted that in the weeks before Lila disappeared, she'd been acting strange, staring at reflections, saying she felt like someone was copying her thoughts. Even drew symbols in her notebook she didn't understand. I asked if she still had them. She sent me photos. When I looked at them, those symbols matched the ones on the drawing that showed up on my doorstep. Now I was convinced this wasn't coincidence. The problem was, once I started digging deeper, I wasn't alone. That week, I noticed someone had been in my garage. Nothing stolen, just disturbed, tools slightly moved. One drawer open when I knew it had been shut. A footprint on the dusty floor that didn't match mine. The paranoia set in fast. I changed my locks, installed new cameras. But whoever was watching me didn't want to be seen. They wanted me to know they were there. And that made everything worse. In my desperation, I called the lead detective on Lila's case, Officer Granger. A good man, but tired. He'd been the kind who wanted resolution fast. Too fast. I told him about the call. His response was like he'd rehearsed it. Sometimes the mind makes things up, especially during anniversaries. Phones get spoofed. Hackers mess with people for fun. But when I mentioned the voicemail that disappeared from my logs before I could save it, I heard a shift in his tone, like he knew more than he was saying. He ended the call quickly after that, told me to get some rest. And then the anonymous email arrived that no subject, no body, just an attachment, a single file. When I opened it, it was grainy surveillance footage, dated 3 weeks after Lila had supposedly died. The camera looked like one from a gas station or back alley, but the girl in the clip, she looked just like Lila. Same hair, same walk. She turned toward the lens just enough for me to see a familiar silver chain she always wore. I froze the frame and stared. It was her. She was alive, or at least had been. But that raised new questions. If Lila survived, who had we buried? Why would someone send this to me now? And why the cryptic phone calls instead of a direct contact? I called the number back repeatedly. Nothing. I even uploaded the clip to a private Reddit thread, hoping some online sleuths could enhance the image or locate the camera source. Most users debated whether it was real or just deep fake tech. A few believed me. One even messaged me privately saying the area looked like a known hub for human trafficking activity, and that similar sightings had been reported across nearby counties. But the reports kept vanishing from public databases. That's when I remembered someone from Lila's school, a man named Mr. Arnett, substitute teacher. Always had this off-kilter energy about him. Friendly, but too interested in the students' personal lives. Lila once mentioned how he asked her about her drawings, her dreams. She brushed it off as weird teacher stuff, but I filed it away. When I tried to find him now, he was gone. Left town 2 weeks after Lila vanished. No forwarding address. No employment history since. But here's the catch. Someone using his name rented a storage unit downtown a month ago. I only found that out by accident, through a buddy who worked at the security company that oversaw the property. I knew I had to see it for myself. It was raining that night, the kind of cold, steady rain that turns your breath to steam and makes your jacket feel like paper. I used a fake ID to pose as someone from maintenance and slipped into the facility. Found the unit, broke the padlock. Inside, it wasn't what I expected. No signs of a person living there. Just stacks of old-school paper files, maps with pins, photographs of kids, some of whom I recognized from local missing posters. But the most chilling item was a wall covered in scribbled numbers, phone sequences, and strange diagrams that looked like someone tried to decode transmissions. In the center of that wall was a printed photo of Lila. Taped under it, a sticky note with 4 words. Third call, third door. That was last night. And now, as I sit here writing this out, the burner phone just lit up again. Private number. But this time, the screen didn't say unknown. It said, answer if you remember. And I did. I picked it up. And what I heard wasn't her voice at all. When I answered that third call, I expected her. I wanted her. I needed to hear Lila's voice again, to confirm this wasn't just a spiral of grief pulling me under. But what came through the speaker wasn't anything human. It was a low, warbling sound, like a voice stretched through static, trying to mimic speech but missing something essential. It didn't speak words. It spoke tones, like Morse code built out of fear. My spine tightened as I listened. I knew it wasn't her. But I also knew, without question, that whatever it was, it had heard her before. And maybe it was still with her. The line cut after 21 seconds. Then silence again. My breathing had gone shallow, heart knocking in my chest, and suddenly my room didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt observed, touched, as if some invisible current had crept in during the call, and now sat quietly in the corners, watching me from a place I couldn't see but definitely felt. That night I couldn't sleep. I left every light on, not because I was scared of the dark, but because I was scared of what might move in it when I wasn't looking. When morning came, I went back to the storage unit, hoping to double back, to gather the evidence I left behind. This time I brought a camera. I was going to film everything, upload it, show the world what I'd found. But when I reached the unit, it was empty, completely cleared out. The wall was wiped clean, the floor swept. Every trace of Arnett's twisted shrine to the missing had been erased like it was never there. The only thing left behind was a single key, taped to the back wall with blue painter's tape. No label, no address, just a shape I didn't recognize. As I held it in my hand, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about chasing answers anymore. This was personal. Someone had been here after me, and they wanted me to know it. I called Bree again. Her voice was quiet, different this time. She told me she'd gone through Lila's old sketchbooks again, and found a page she didn't remember seeing before. It was tucked between others, like it had been added later. It wasn't a drawing, it was a map, a grid layout, like a small town. But not our town. There were street names she didn't recognize, a few numbers scrawled in the corners, and a circle drawn over what looked like an old power station. The number 41 to 2 was scribbled in red across the top. Bree said she was scared to show anyone. She said she felt like someone was following her. And then, as if to prove it, the line cut mid-sentence. I tried calling back, straight to voicemail. I was losing allies faster than I was finding answers. That's when I remembered something. An old friend of mine, Gabe, who used to work in cybersecurity for a defense contractor. We hadn't spoken in years, not since I got married and started a family. But I needed someone I could trust. Gabe was always paranoid in a way that turned out useful. When I called him, he answered on the second ring. And when I told what had been happening, he didn't laugh or dismiss it. Instead, he asked me one thing. Have you been near anything with old wiring lately? That question caught me off guard. I told him about the storage unit, the strange key, the power station on the map. His tone dropped. There's chatter on some encrypted forums, he said. People talking about signals, off-the-grid bursts that ride piggyback on old utility channels. Frequencies used decades ago for civil defense. They've been picking up strange transmissions tied to missing persons cases. Most think it's just noise until it happens in their town. He paused. Listen, man, I don't know what you stepped into, but it's not new. You're poking at something that's been buried deep for a reason. I asked him if he could trace the number, maybe find out where the calls were coming from. He said he'd try, but it would take time. Meanwhile, I followed the map. The grid led me 2 towns over, past old farmland and shuttered train yards. The power station was barely a structure anymore, just rusted fencing and broken glass windows. But inside, hidden under a collapsed stairwell, I found a lock hatch. And the key? It fit. What I found underneath was a tunnel, lit dimly by flickering emergency lights. It smelled like damp concrete in time. I didn't go far, just enough to see the hallway stretch into darkness. But on the wall near the entrance, someone had scratched the words, "You'll see her again, but not like before." I stepped back into daylight with my heart thudding. Something about that message shook me, not just because it hinted at Lila being alive, but because it implied she had been changed. That night, Gabe called me back, panicked. He told me the trace hadn't led to a phone tower. It had led to a decommissioned research facility connected to a Department of Defense psychological testing site from the early 2000s, one that had been scrubbed from all official databases after a congressional inquiry. Gabe said the number didn't show up in any carrier registry. It was like the call had come from a ghost protocol, something only accessible through classified systems or underground frequency loops. Before I could ask anything else, Gabe said one more thing. They'll come for you now. They always do after the 3rd call. And then the line went dead again. Within hours, I noticed a first car, parked outside my house. Windows tinted. Never moving, never leaving. Then came the man in the dark windbreaker, who showed up at the gas station while I was buying coffee, staring at me a little too long before disappearing down an aisle. Even the mail started to arrive differently. Postmarked from places I'd never heard of, addressed with handwriting that didn't match the return names. One envelope had no letter inside at all, just a Polaroid of Lila standing in what looked like the tunnel I just visited. Her face was blurred, her eyes scratched out. I didn't know what was real anymore. Had someone staged all this? Was I unraveling under guilt and loss? Or was this a puzzle I was never meant to solve? I went to the police again, this time with everything I had. The photo, the key, Gabe's trace data. I begged them to reopen the case. They told me someone from federal jurisdiction had already flagged my activity, that I was to cease independent investigation, that I was obstructing an ongoing inquiry. Their tone wasn't just firm, it was threatening. And then one officer, someone younger who had grown up with Lila, slipped me a note as I left. 3 words. They knew her. Now everything has changed. I can't trust the police. I can't reach Gabe. Bree has vanished. And I think someone's been inside my house again. Lila's journal is missing, and my cameras were wiped clean. But this story isn't over. Because tonight, the doorbell rang. And when I opened it, there was no one there. Only a package. Inside it, a flash drive. And on it, a video of Lila, sitting in a room I don't recognize, looking straight into the camera, mouthing one word, "Run." I watched the video of Lila on that flash drive at least a dozen times that night, each replay peeling off another layer of disbelief and coating it with dread. Her eyes, even blurred by low resolution, looked alive, terrified but aware. She was in a room, sterile-looking, with no windows, white walls too clean to feel real, like some underground facility or medical holding chamber. There was a metal table behind her, and wires curled down from the ceiling into the corners of the frame. She looked thin, her hair darker and messier than I remembered. But it was the way she moved, jerky, as if she wasn't fully in control. That unsettled me most. And yet, she leaned forward, pressed her lips together like she was fighting to say something she wasn't allowed to say. Then she mouthed that word again, "Run," and the screen flickered black. The file ended. I sat there in silence, watching the screen long after it went dark, wondering what kind of world I had stepped into and how far I had already sunk. I wanted to believe that she was reaching out, that there was still a chance to bring her back. But every new clue seemed less like a trail and more like a trap. And just when I thought I was alone in this, the story found a new player, someone I never expected to be involved in any of this. My younger brother, Nolan, had been living upstate. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. Grief has a strange way of pushing people away instead of bringing them together. He was always a logical one, the one who handled pain by closing doors, deleting memories, keeping his emotions wrapped in caution tape. But that morning, he called me out of the blue. His voice was sharp, tight, the kind of voice you only use when fear turns into panic. He said he'd received a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo. It was of me, sitting on my front steps the morning after I watched Lila's video. The timestamp in the corner was just 2 hours old. Nolan was scared. He said the envelope was slipped under his door while he slept, and when he checked his apartment security feed, there were missing frames, just like my house. Someone had erased their presence. And that wasn't all. The letter had a second photo, one of Lila as a child. It was a shot only the family would have had, a birthday party at the lake, age 7. She was wearing the blue dress Dana had hand-sewn, the one with the mismatched button she always insisted was her lucky outfit. The image was perfect, undamaged, but something had been written in sharp black ink across her smile. She remembers you. Do you remember her? I told Nolan everything. Every call, every symbol, every room, every strange disappearance and whispered warning. He didn't try to argue anymore. He just asked, "What do we do next?" That's when I started to realize this wasn't just my story anymore. Someone had widened the circle, either to warn me or to trap us both. Maybe Nolan had been involved from the beginning in a way I hadn't seen. Or maybe someone wanted me to think that. I couldn't trust anyone anymore, even the people I loved. I started going through old family photos, trying to see if there were patterns in the background, strange symbols, inconsistencies in Lila's drawings I might have overlooked. And then I found it, buried deep in a folder from her middle school art project, a sketch of what looked like that same white-walled room, the same wires, the same table, and in the corner, a figure drawn in pencil, tall and narrow, standing behind a two-way mirror. No face, just a single black circle where a face should be. I confronted Dana. She was living in Arizona now, working for a nonprofit that helped families of missing persons. I FaceTimed her and showed her the drawing. She didn't say anything at first. Then she looked off screen and whispered something to someone else in the room. I asked her who it was. She said it was no one, but her eyes said otherwise. Then she did something I didn't expect. She ended the call without a word and texted me 2 minutes later with only this: "Don't trust Nolan. Not yet." The bottom dropped out of me. Suddenly, everything I thought I could lean on cracked under my feet. If Dana didn't trust Nolan and Nolan was being watched, or worse, manipulating me, then where was I supposed to turn? Gabe had vanished. Bree was unreachable. The police were compromised. And now my own family was breaking apart from inside out. That night, I heard something in my backyard. I'd installed motion-triggered floodlights and cameras everywhere after the second break-in. But this time, the lights didn't turn on. The cameras glitched. I saw it happen in real time. My phone buzzed, showed a feed from the backyard, and right before it cut out, I saw someone standing just outside the camera's edge. Not moving, not hiding, just standing, facing the house. I ran out, flashlight in hand, weapon in the other, but found nothing, just footprints. Small ones, Lila's size. I followed them. They led to the woods behind the house. And there, on the tree closest to the edge of the property, carved in deep lines, were words that shook me my core. She remembers a lie. That's when I knew. There was something I had forgotten, or maybe repressed. Something no one had told me. A part of Lila's story that I had blacked out, because facing it meant accepting a truth I wasn't ready for. But if she was trying to warn me, try to remind me of what had been buried, then it meant the story wasn't about how she disappeared. It was about why she was taken, and maybe, just Maybe she hadn't been the first. I barely slept after finding that carving in the tree. I kept staring at those 5 words etched into the bark. Asterisk. She remembers a lie, asterisk. And every second that passed made me feel like I'd missed something so massive it could tear everything apart if I looked too closely. I kept pacing the house, circling like prey in a cage, checking locks I'd already checked 10 times. The silence around me wasn't peaceful anymore. It was calculated, loaded. Every shadow in the hallway felt like a warning. Every sound outside, a gust of wind, a crack of a branch, felt intentional. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being studied. And deep down, I knew something was coming. The next morning, I tried to call Nolan again. No answer. I called 3 more times. Still nothing. I thought about what Dana had said. Asterisk, don't trust him, asterisk. And I hated that it was starting to make sense. He'd been too calm during our last conversation, too curious about specific details. But still, he was my brother. If there was even a chance he was in danger too, I had to find out for myself. I packed up, drove the 3 hours north to his apartment, and when I got there, everything inside was untouched. The lights were still on. The sink was dripping. A mug of coffee sat on the counter, still warm. His phone was on the couch. Screen cracked. But he was gone. No forced entry. No struggle. It was like he'd just evaporated. What sent a spike of cold through my spine wasn't just that he was missing. It was what I found on the wall in his living room, taped to the white paint, using the same kind of blue tape that was in the storage unit, was a photograph, a recent one. It was of me, taken from a high angle like a drone or camera hidden across the street. The timestamp said 4:17 a.m., just hours after I'd found a carving in the woods. I stared at the picture, pulse racing, and realized I was standing in that exact spot when I felt the sensation of someone watching. It hadn't been paranoia. Someone had been there, watching me, tracking my every move, documenting me like I was part of an experiment. Next to the photo, written directly on the wall in permanent marker, were 3 words. You forgot everything. That broke something open in me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I seriously considered the idea that my memories weren't whole, that something or someone had erased parts of my life without my knowing. I thought back to the therapy Dana and I forced Lila into after her night terrors began a few years ago. She'd wake up screaming, swearing there were men with wires for faces in her room. We dismissed it as trauma, the result of us separating, the instability in the house. The therapist had been a friend of Dana's from college, a woman named Elise who specialized in childhood PTSD. I hadn't thought about her in years. But now, something about that name struck me as wrong. I pulled out an old box from my garage filled with Lila's medical files, school papers, everything I kept after the funeral. I searched for Elise's contact info, and when I found it, my chest tightened. There was no license under her name, no record of her practice. Nothing online. Nothing in the state database. She wasn't real. I called Dana again, and this time she answered, but only said, "I told you not to trust anyone," before hanging up again. I was cracking apart inside. My grip on reality was unraveling thread by thread. What else had I blocked out? What else had been implanted in my head? Was Lila's therapist part of this? Was Dana? I left Nolan's apartment just as the sun started dipping. I had this heavy feeling in my chest, like something was going to break before the night ended. And I wasn't wrong, because when I got home, the front door was wide open. Everything inside had been ransacked. Not like a burglary. No valuables were missing, but all of Lila's things were gone. Her drawings, her journals, her voice recordings, even the photos of her from the wall. It was like she'd never existed, like someone was trying to erase her all over again. I ran from room to room, screaming, desperate to find one shred of her that they hadn't taken. And then I saw it. On the kitchen table, a single piece of lined notebook paper, folded once. No envelope. On the front, my name. Inside it read, "Do you really want to remember what you did?" That question buried itself into my chest like a nail. I collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard, my body shaking. I was being hunted, yes, But worse, I was being blamed, like I'd triggered all of this, like I'd set this entire nightmare in motion and then forgotten it. What had I done? What had I buried? Could this be some psychological punishment? Was Lila not the only victim? That night, I drove to the only place I thought they wouldn't follow me, an abandoned cabin that belonged to my late uncle. Deep in the national forest, no cell reception, no cameras, nothing smart. Just isolation. I brought everything I had left. Flash drives, maps, photos I duplicated, my burner phone, whatever scraps I could save before they were scrubbed from existence too. But when I got there was already someone waiting inside. A man, late 40s, beard, military build. I reached for my gun, but he raised both hands, calm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I used to work for the same program they're using now." I asked him what he meant, and he didn't waste time. It's called Project Silo. Off the books, privately funded. Started in the early 2000s. Goal was simple. Use induced trauma and synthetic memory to create controllable subjects. Children were ideal. Clean slates, easily manipulated, high neuroplasticity. They ran trials in select regions. Small towns, quiet places, places where a missing kid wouldn't raise more than a few headlines. My hands went numb. My ears started to ring. "They're not trying to find your daughter," he said. "They're trying to bury what they did to her." I asked who they were. He paused. "They're the ones who taught you to forget." But before I could ask anything else, before I could even breathe, the windows of the cabin lit up with high beams. Cars. Multiple. Engines revving. Shadows moving fast. The man didn't flinch. He handed me a folder, thick, sealed, marked with a red stamp that just said, "Classified / echo." "Run," he whispered. Same word Lila had mouthed. "They're not here to talk." And then he pushed open the back door and stepped out into the trees. I grabbed the folder, my bag, and bolted. I don't know what happened to him. I didn't look back. But somewhere deep in those woods, I started to remember something. A cold room, a chair with restraints, a voice that told me, "You'll feel better once you forget." And Lila crying in the next room. I drove for hours, the gravel kicking up behind me like I was trying to outrun something bigger than time itself. I didn't know where I was going, just away from the headlights, away from the folder that now felt radioactive in the passenger seat, away from a memory that had surfaced like a splinter from a healed wound. But even as I sped through the winding mountain roads, one question kept clawing at the back of my skull. What if none of this was ever about Lila? What if the story I'd been telling myself, this relentless chase to find my missing daughter, was never the real story at all? What if it had always been about me? I pulled off the road once I felt far enough to catch my breath. Middle of nowhere, trees all around. No lights, no signals, no signs of life. I sat in the silence, letting the ticking engine fill the dark, and then finally opened the folder the man had handed me in the cabin. Inside were documents, government seals, redacted files, lab reports, audio transcripts. Pages upon pages of testing logs labeled with a code name, Subject Delta 41. The notes described experimental procedures involving memory isolation, behavioral reshaping, trauma triggers, induced identity fragmentation. It was the kind of thing you expect to find in a dystopian thriller, not real life. And that's when I saw the name on the intake form. My own. Name, Grayson K. Adler. Assigned subject ID, Delta 41. Date of induction, September 18th, 2003. Status, memory partitioning complete. My breath caught in my throat. I read it again and again, hoping my eyes were wrong. But no, there it was. My name, my date of birth, my signature. It wasn't Lila who had been part of this program. It was me. And suddenly, like a house of cards collapsing in slow motion, everything I thought I knew began to disintegrate. What if I hadn't forgotten her because of grief, but because someone had built an entire reality for me to keep the truth hidden? Inside the folder was a USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop, which I'd been too afraid to power on until now. The files were encrypted, but one folder wasn't. It was labeled failsafe, and inside it was a single video file. dated 3 years ago. I opened it, and what I saw made my stomach twist in a way that no words can explain. It was me, sitting in a white room, hair longer, eyes sunken, like I hadn't slept in days. Across from me was a man in a lab coat, face blurred, voice disguised. "State your reason for opting into Procedure Echo," the man said. My past self took a long breath, voice shaking. To forget what I did, to forget her. The man leaned forward. "And do you understand the risks?" "I understand that if I remember, people will die." A pause. "Do you still want to proceed?" My image nodded. Eraser. And that's when I realized Lila hadn't been taken from me. I had volunteered to erase her. Not because she died, not because she was kidnapped, but because something she'd done or witnessed was so dangerous, so destabilizing, that the only way to protect her, or protect them, was to make myself forget she ever existed. Only the procedure hadn't worked the way they planned. The memory had begun to resurface. The brain fights back, even when sliced apart. The love of a parent refuses to stay buried, even under engineered amnesia. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. I couldn't sit still. I started pacing outside the car, under a blanket of stars, my thoughts racing through everything I'd overlooked, every unexplained moment. Dana's cryptic warning, Nolan's disappearance, the tree carving, the fake therapist, the note under Lila's pillow. The messages weren't clues about a crime. They were recovery triggers. Carefully placed psychological breadcrumbs designed to break the seal I had willingly placed on my own mind. And suddenly, another realization hit me like a punch to the ribs. I wasn't the only subject. I drove to the last place I thought I'd ever return to, Dana's old cabin in South Hollow, the one she inherited from her grandfather, where we used to take Lila for long weekends before things fell apart. It was off the grid, no neighbors, no surveillance. But when I got there, the windows were lit. She was already there, waiting, and she wasn't alone. Nolan stepped out from the shadows, alive, pale, and furious. "I told you to stay buried," he said, voice shaking with something deeper than anger. Dana didn't say anything. She just looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, or maybe something worse. I saw the video. I said quietly, "I remembered." Nolan stepped forward, eyes dark. "Then you just killed us all." Dana finally spoke. "You were never meant to remember. That was the deal. You begged them to erase her, Grayson, because of what she became." I looked back and forth between them, unable to form the words. What she became? Dana's eyes welled up. Lila wasn't sick. She was activated. You saw what she did, and you chose to protect her. You chose to take the fall. That's when Nolan tossed a stack of Polaroids at my feet. I picked them up with trembling hands. Photos of destroyed rooms, burned out homes, bloodstains, all dated between 2018 and 2021. In each one, a small, shadowy figure in the corner, her shape unmistakable. Lila, she wasn't dead. She wasn't taken. She was still out there. And she was looking for me. Grayson stared down at the Polaroid scattered at his feet, each one tugging at something deep and raw inside him. A primal ache that wasn't quite fear, but something worse. Recognition. The girl in the shadows, the smudged silhouette with dark hair and bare feet, wasn't just Lila. She was a version of her he couldn't reconcile with the memory of his daughter feeding squirrels in the backyard or crying when her goldfish died. This version had a stillness to her, a kind of silence that didn't come from fear, but from calculation. And if the timestamps on the photos were real, then she had been active for years, moving, hiding, watching. Grayson's breath tightened as the truth swirled around him like smoke. Not only had he erased her from his memory, but so had Dana, Nolan, and who knows how many others. This wasn't about forgetting a tragedy. This was about surviving a secret, one that had a heartbeat. Dana broke the silence first, her voice low, almost pleading. "You asked them to lock her away inside your own mind, because she wasn't a child anymore, Grayson. Not in the way you remembered her. You saw what she did to that facility. The agents, the doctors. You saw what she became when they tried to use her." Grayson shook his head, still unwilling to accept it. She was 7. She didn't even know how to ride a bike. Nolan stepped closer, his tone harder now. She was 7 when she walked out of that fire, without a single burn. She was 7 when she made 2 armed guards turn on each other with nothing but a look. Whatever they injected into those kids, whatever program they buried in the Southwood labs, she was the only one who survived it, and you love her too much to let them put her down. Grayson's knees buckled slightly, and he leaned against the porch railing, trying to piece it all together. The nightmares, the memory flashes, the feeling of being watched, his therapist telling him to stop chasing ghosts. It wasn't grief, it was bleed-through, the cracks in the wall of false peace he'd built inside himself. But now the wall had collapsed, and with it came the weight of decision he wasn't ready to make. Dana pulled a burner phone from her pocket, tapped it twice, and handed it to him. They know you remembered. There's a safe route out of the country. A plane. A new identity. You take it now, and you disappear forever. No more questions. No more danger. Grayson blinked. And if I don't... Nolan answered this time. Then you have 60 hours before they send in a clean team. Not just for you. For anyone who's had contact with her. Including your sister. Including her kids. The blood drained from Grayson's face. They'll go after them? Dana nodded slowly. Anyone Lila might try to find. Anyone she might still remember. The words hit like a punch to the chest. His sister, Caroline, she'd helped raise Lila. His niece, Rachel, had been like a sister to her. If Lila was retracing the lines of her old life, she'd go there next. Not out of malice. Out of memory. Love. And that made her predictable, which made her vulnerable. You're telling me I have to choose between running and letting them die? He said, voice shaking. You're giving me that choice? Dana looked down. No, she is. She's already in Oregon. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Caroline lived in Eugene, which meant this wasn't just about memory anymore. It was about time. Grayson felt like his world had split in half. Part of him still clung to the idea of Lila as his daughter, the soft-voiced little girl with scraped knees and a love for stray animals. But another part now knew that she had become something else entirely. Something made, not born, a living key to a door that powerful people had tried desperately to seal. And yet, in her eyes, blurred though they were in those photos, he could still see the faintest flicker of something unmistakable. Love, which made it all the more impossible. Come with me, he said to Dana, gripping the burner phone tightly. We find her. We get to her before they do. But Dana's response stopped him cold. I can't. If I get near her again, I'm compromised. We all are. That's the fail-safe they built in. I'm monitored. Nolan's monitored. But you? They never expected you to remember. You're the only one she might still trust. He didn't know whether to be furious or terrified. You've been using me this whole time. Dana's eyes didn't flinch. We were trying to keep her alive. Grayson took a deep breath, the wind biting his skin as he turned to face the road. He knew what he had to do, but knowing didn't make it easier. Somewhere out there was a girl with his blood and a storm in her brain, hunted not because of what she'd done, but because of what she could still do, and the clock had already started ticking. He slid into the driver's seat, threw the burner phone onto the dash, and started the engine. His next stop wasn't about uncovering the past anymore. It was about protecting the future. But behind him, he could still feel Dana's eyes on him, and in them, a question he couldn't unhear. What if she doesn't want to be saved? The roads twisted through the Oregon backwoods like veins, and Grayson kept the gas pedal pressed just enough to feel the weight of every mile. His thoughts were louder than the tires grinding against the gravel. Caroline wasn't answering her phone. Her last voicemail was 2 days old. Some innocuous message about getting her roof looked at. She had no idea she was a target. He'd always assumed his past ended with Lila, with the night of the fire, with the memories he'd been forced to forget. But now, with every turn of the wheel and flicker of paranoia at every set of headlights behind him, it was becoming clear. The truth wasn't just buried. It had been orchestrated, erased, and replaced. The first major crack hit outside Eugene city limits. Grayson's burner phone buzzed again, Just once. A single vibration. No number. No screen message. Just a ping. And then another. He'd barely looked at the dashboard before the road behind him exploded in a flash of orange and black. The blast rocking his car off the shoulder and into a ditch. Dazed, ears ringing, he crawled out of the passenger side window as flames consumed what had once been the SUV that had followed him for the past 20 minutes. They were getting sloppy. Or they were desperate. He staggered to the road, legs trembling, adrenaline slicing through his confusion. That car had been tailing him since Salem. At first, he thought it was nothing, just Oregon traffic at night. But now, they weren't just following. They were cleaning. And then the second crack hit, emotional, not physical. Caroline's front door swung open before he even knocked. But the woman standing there wasn't surprised. She wasn't shocked. She didn't gasp and pull him into a hug. She just stared, eyes dead still, and then slowly stepped aside. "They said you'd come," she murmured. Grayson froze. Asked who said that. She gestured toward the kitchen, her voice a whisper. "You should see for yourself." The living room was too quiet. No cartoons, no toys, no half-empty juice boxes. And then he saw the monitors. Not one, not two, 6, mounted on a wall above Caroline's fireplace. Surveillance feeds, audio logs, dossiers with old photos of Lila, back when she was just a girl with freckles and 2 big sneakers. Caroline moved behind him, quiet like she used to be as a kid, just like Lila had been. They started coming around after the second breach. Said it wasn't about her anymore. Said there were more like her. More who got out. They called them echoes. I didn't know what that meant until I saw the footage. She tapped one of the monitors. A blurry hospital camera feed played on loop, black and white, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. A child, no older than 10, stood at the center of a hallway. Lights flickered. Nurses screamed off-screen. The camera glitched, and for 2 frames, the child's face became Lila's. "They're trying to find them," Caroline whispered. "But they don't want to study them. They want to erase them." She wasn't the only survivor, Grayson. She was the first. Grayson stepped back, chest burning. "You knew this? All this time?" Her eyes glistened. "They made me choose. They showed me what would happen if I didn't help. Rachel's school was threatened. My job, everything. They said you couldn't remember because you promised to forget. But if you ever came back, if you ever tried to find her, they have no choice but to finish what they started." The betrayal didn't come like a knife. It came like a sickness, a rising, drowning weight that pressed against his ribs. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a network, a coordinated cover-up that had reached into his own bloodline. They didn't just erase Lila from his life. They rewrote history, and everyone connected to her. "Where's Rachel?" he asked, voice barely holding. "She's gone," Caroline said, turning toward the hallway. 2 nights ago. Same as last time. I thought she was with friends, but then I found this." She handed him a crumpled drawing. It was simple, childlike, crayons and wild colors. A girl with black hair, red eyes, and behind her, fire. The same image Lila had drawn as a child. The same vision. That's when it all clicked. The facility hadn't created one anomaly. They'd created dozens. Lila had just been the only one to remember. The program wasn't a failure. It was a seed, a generation of enhanced children spread out across the country, each one ticking down to whatever final phase was next. The conspiracy wasn't about containment. It was about control. And Grayson had just made himself the loose thread they couldn't afford to leave hanging. Behind him, Caroline said something he couldn't quite hear, but it wasn't her words that chilled him. It was the sound of boots on the porch outside. Multiple. Heavy, organized. He turned toward the window and saw them. Unmarked vans. Silhouettes moving in sync. Flashlights off. No sirens. No warning. Grayson turned back to Caroline, but her face said everything. They're already inside. The cabin was silent, except for the rhythmic pulse of Grayson's heartbeat pounding in his ears. The mountain air was too still, too quiet, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. He crouched behind a rotted-out tree stump, eyes fixed on the building ahead. The old ranger station stood at the edge of the clearing. Windows blacked out, a single antenna crowning its roof like a needle piercing the sky. This was where the trail had led him. Through black site hospitals, burned government records, encrypted files stolen off dark web forums, even coded messages embedded in Lila's old drawings. And now this place, the source, the end point, the beginning. Inside they were waiting. It wasn't just Caroline's betrayal, or the death squads who followed him across state lines. It wasn't even the knowledge that dozens, maybe hundreds, of children like Lila had been scattered across the country like ghosts of a broken experiment. It was the fact that every step closer to the truth had cost him something he didn't know he still had. His trust, his past, and worst of all, his belief that he could ever fix what had been broken. He slipped through the back entrance after disabling the lock. Years of muscle memory took over. Every step calculated, every breath shallow. The interior was dim, humming with outdated servers and flickering monitors. It smelled like chemicals and fear. The walls were lined with folders stamped redacted, and one of the monitors displayed a looping feed of a child sleeping, Lila, from 10 years ago. She hadn't just been watched. She had been conditioned. Grayson moved deeper into the station until he reached a metal door sealed with an old biometric scanner. A faint warmth pulsed to the floor, beneath his boots, some sort of underground power source. He pried open the access panel and hardwired the lock, fingers moving faster than his thoughts. The door hissed open, and there he was, Dr. Everett Lang. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. The man Grayson once knew as a behavioral specialist. The man who had helped him and Lila through her night terrors. The man who was never a therapist, but a handler. Lang looked up from the desk, unsurprised. "You were always the variable, Grayson," he said calmly. "I told him the suppression wouldn't last forever. The memory trigger was too deeply encoded." Grayson raised a gun. "You used my daughter. You used me." Lang smiled faintly, like a man who pitied a broken animal. "You volunteered. Don't you remember? The grief of losing her mother nearly destroyed you. We offered you a chance to rewrite your pain. We implanted her memories into the prototype. You raised her, thinking she was your daughter, but she was a carrier, a living archive. And when the time came, she did what she was programmed to do." Grayson felt his knees weaken. Programmed to do what? Lang stood, walking slowly toward the center of the room, where a panel slid open to reveal another monitor. The video feed was live, somewhere underground. Children sat in a large room, eyes closed, unmoving. Above them, projections of fire and symbols spun in eerie silence. Her drawings weren't just memories, Lang said. They were beacons, triggers. Every time she drew that house, that fire, that woman in the mirror, she was broadcasting it to the others, activating them, syncing their minds. We were building a hive. Grayson felt something tear in his chest. She wasn't a project. She was my daughter. Lang tilted his head. "You sure about that?" The screen flickered in their in grainy night vision. Lila stood in the center of the children, arms raised, eyes glowing faintly. But she wasn't a child anymore. Her face had changed, older, sharper. She looked directly at the camera. "She found them," Lang whispered. She remembered everything. And now they remembered too. Suddenly, the screen behind Lang shifted again. Security cam footage from the forest. One of the teams outside was down. The van was overturned. Smoke curled into the trees. Lang frowned. "That's not possible. No one knows this location." Grayson didn't answer, because now, standing in the doorway behind Lang, was someone else. Lila, not the 10-year-old he remembered. A teenager now, pale, wild-eyed. Lang turned, breath-catching. "You shouldn't be here." But Lila stepped forward, her voice low and cutting through the air like glass. "You made me forget, over and over. But this time, I remembered enough to come back." Lang lunged for the alarm, but Grayson fired. One shot to the console, sparks erupting in a shower of fire and static. The station groaned, systems failing, lights flickering. "Dad!" Lila whispered, and the word hit him like a bolt through time. She remembered, but before Grayson could move, the floor trembled. Outside, more vans pulled in. The mountain trembled. Lang, bleeding from his temple, began laughing quietly, almost mournfully. "You think this ends here?" he wheezed. "This was just one facility. There are 12. The beacons have already activated. It's not about you. It's never been about you." And then his last words twisted into a grin. "You think she chose you? She was sent to you." Before Grayson could respond, the blast door behind them buckled. Someone from the outside detonated charges. Gas hissed through the cracks. Lila turned toward him, eyes wide, as everything around him began to fall apart. He had only one thought now: asterisk get her out star. But deep in his mind, even as they fled into the burning woods, Grayson couldn't shake Lang's final words. What if she wasn't the one who needed saving? What if she was the beginning of something far worse? They burned the ranger station to the ground. Grayson didn't watch it fall. He couldn't. There was something deeply final about it, like burying a lie you've lived in for too long. He kept his eyes on Lila instead as they stumbled through the forest, her hand wrapped tightly around his, blood streaking down her temple, eyes still full of memory and something else. Something that terrified him more than anything Lang had ever said. For the first time in years, the truth wasn't just a puzzle. It was a wound, raw and pulsing, and it was theirs to carry now. The drive out of the mountains was silent. No sirens, no helicopters, no pursuit. Just static on the radio and the crushing weight of everything he now understood. It wasn't just that Lila had been part of an experiment. It was that she was the experiment. Living proof that memory could be rewritten, personality reshaped, and identity turned into a transmission. The other children weren't victims. They were receivers. Beacons. A new kind of network. One that no one, not even Lang, could control anymore. They went off-grid for weeks, maybe months. The old lake house in Montana, long abandoned and half-rotted, became their bunker. Grayson boarded the windows and stripped the place of anything digital. The internet was no longer safe. The phone lines felt poisoned. He cooked over fire, filtered water from the stream, and taught Lila how to shoot, how to track, how to think around corners. But she wasn't a child anymore. Not really. The things she knew, languages she'd never been taught, coordinates she could recite in her sleep, fragments of data she would whisper while dreaming. None of it should have been possible. And yet, she never seemed afraid. It was like part of her had accepted who she was a long time ago and had simply waited for the rest of her to catch up. One night, under a sky so black it felt painted on, she told him the truth. Not the version the files had shown, or the twisted memories Lang had planted, but her truth. She remembered the first time she was booted, woken up inside a different body with a voice in her head she didn't recognize. She remembered drawing the same house over and over because it wasn't just a house. It was a location marker, a relay point, a signal. Each line and window and rooftop was encoded with instructions only someone like her could understand. She remembered the tests, the flashes of light, the quiet humming of servers. She even remembered being told, in a voice too calm to be human, that she would eventually lead the rest of them back to where it all began. Grayson asked her if that's what she planned to do. Her answer was simple: not unless they try to take me again. And for a while that was enough. Until it wasn't. Because the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Especially not when it's embedded into the minds of children across the country, spreading like a virus wrapped in memory. Grayson started picking up signals. Low-frequency pings in abandoned frequencies. Whispers on shortwave radio. Code embedded in emergency broadcast tests. And each time, he saw Lila grow quieter, heavier. She knew something was coming. He did too. But it wasn't another squad or a drone or a black van pulling up at night. It was a boy, maybe 12. He walked up the long driveway to the cabin like he knew it by heart. Grayson met him at the porch with a rifle, but the boy only looked up and said, "She called me." Behind him, Lila stepped outside. And for the first time, Grayson saw a look in her that he couldn't read. Not fear, not hope, something in between. She didn't ask who the boy was. She already knew. She asked simply, How many more? He answered without hesitation. 17. So far. The weeks that followed were a blur. They arrived slowly, in pairs and groups, each one with a story, a memory, a drawing. All of them had scars that didn't heal and dreams that didn't fade. And Grayson, for all his anger and loss and confusion, became their protector, their teacher, their witness. He couldn't undo what had been done to them, but he could help them understand it, own it, use it. He tried to keep them hidden. He tried to stay in the shadows. But eventually, the world started noticing. A viral TikTok showing kids with perfect recall. A Reddit thread about missing children who returned with knowledge of places they'd never been. A trending YouTube conspiracy video titled, "The Hive Children, Are They Real?" And then the inevitable journalists, government vans. A quiet knock at the door. This time, Grayson didn't run. He stepped out onto the porch and looked the man in the suit dead in the eyes. "You already lost control," he said. "They're not yours anymore." The man didn't argue. He just handed him a folder. Inside were satellite photos. Dots, circles, maps, not of kids, but of the ones they'd reached. The next wave. Lang had been wrong. The hive didn't need a central node. They were decentralized now, self-replicating. Grayson looked back at Lila, who stood behind him, calm and collected, the others watching from the shadows like silent sentinels. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. The man in the suit said one last thing before he left. "You can't stop what's coming." Grayson didn't respond, because deep down he knew the truth. This wasn't about stopping it anymore. It was about preparing for what came after. So he let the cabin become their fortress, their training ground, their sanctuary. And late at night, when the wind howled through the trees and the stars burned a little too bright, Grayson would sit by the fire and listen to the children whisper in their sleep. Sometimes they spoke in code. Sometimes they spoke in dreams. And sometimes they spoke in warnings. Because whatever was coming next, whatever the hive had become, it wasn't just a side effect. It wasn't an accident. It was evolution. And it had already begun. If you watch my video, then give me comment on my video.